dialed in. Great. Again, welcome. My name is Ruben Langbroek. I'm head of Asia Pacific at GRESB. And today we'll have a webinar during which we'll talk about and actually also demonstrate our brand new tool, which is called the GRESB Climate Risk Platform. Perhaps a bit of housekeeping first. Before we get started, I would like to explain how you can actively participate in today's event. After all, it's a webinar. You can ask questions throughout this webinar by using the Q&A button somewhere here within your Zoom screen. And we'll try to address all of the questions at the end during the Q&A session later on. If there won't be any questions that we can address due to time issues, we'll try to answer those questions separately after this webinar. And also please note that this webinar is being recorded. Now, before I introduce today's very distinguished speakers, I'd like to provide a very short introduction to this quite fascinating topic. And coincidentally, earlier today, I spoke at another webinar here in Australia, Sydney, about responsible investing in real estate. And in that webinar, I explained how responsible investing is all about understanding environmental, social, and governance, or ESG risks, with the aim to identify and better manage those risks, and as such also achieving better investment returns. I think it's quite clear that there's a wide range of acute and more chronic risks that impact real estate investment. But it's also clear as we speak to different stakeholders within the industry, both investors and managers, that in terms of the longer term risks, climate change definitely is on top of mind. And that's not just because climate change affects, let's say, our social systems in terms of human health, our infrastructure systems, but also energy, food and water supplies. But besides those more intangible or perhaps softer issues, it also has a very tangible financial and economic impact. And to illustrate this, last year, extreme weather events caused by climate change and also driven by climate change cost around $100 billion in damages globally. And by 2050, this is expected to increase to $8 trillion if no risk mitigation actions are taken. So you can understand why asset owners and managers are very much interested in better understanding what is at risk, because what is at risk and what you put at risk also reveals what you value. So GRESB has been looking at how to better create insights and new tools for our different customers and members. And that's also why we are very proud to launch our climate risk platform, which allows you, industry stakeholders, to integrate physical climate risk and climate risk exposure data into your investment decisions. And first on this platform, we're very proud to have Munich Re as a partner, because they provide asset level intelligence on geospatial risk exposures across multiple climate scenarios, but also across different timeframes. Now, we'll definitely hear more about what those scenarios look like. We're actually going to see what the product looks like. I think the team has done an amazing job. But before we do so, I would very much like to introduce today's speakers. First, we have Sergey Obelensky, who is Executive Director, Corporate Sales, Risk Management Partners at Munich Re. Then secondly, we have Dr. Jürgen Simicek, Manager Geo Risk at Munich Re. And last, but certainly not least, my colleague, Eric Landry, who is our climate change specialist at GRESB. Now, before we're going to hear more from them, I would now like to hand over the virtual mic to Sergey to talk a bit more about Munich Re and what they do in this space. Sergey, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Ruben, for the nice introduction. And also thank you very much from my side for giving us the opportunity to participate in your webinar today. So we at Munich Re are quite excited about the partnership which we are starting with you on this very important topic of climate change measurement. We were approached by GRESB, no, not by GRESB actually, but by a partner of GRESB more or less a year ago, a big pension fund in Netherlands. And they were very concerned about the impact of climate change on their investments. and they were saying, okay, so we had this situation with some investors in New York, and we were talking about a great commercial center we were buying somewhere in the Big Apple. And then they were doing us all kind of questions. And one stakeholder came with a question, well, what's the exposure to climate? You know, what about flood? And they were all caught off guard. So I don't know what, you know, I don't know where's my flood exposure? Yeah. And I think this was one of the aspects which triggered the discussion to say, okay, we need to institutionalize the effect of climate on our investments in a more, let's say, professional way. And that's how they reached out to us. Munich Re is one of the leading reinsurance companies in the world. We have a 50 billion premium volume, and in 2019 we made a result of nearly 3 billion euros. The core of our business is climate. Most of the risks we take are climate related. So it was a natural fit that they would actually ask us about how we saw climate, how we measure climate, and how we evaluate this. And that's how we started discussing our tools and the scores we have. And they seem to be quite satisfied. So that's how we came into discussion with GRESB. And I'm also very excited to see how this cooperation will look going forward. That was all from my side, Ruben, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Sergey. Now let's go over to Eric, who will educate us more on climate risk and also the different risks that fall under climate risk. Eric, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Ruben. And so as he said, I'm GRESB's climate change specialist. And so, yeah, I think you guys can see my screen here in terms of just the cover page of the climate risk platform here. So just as a quick agenda, we'll go over just an introduction. We're doing that currently. We'll go over climate risk in general and what we're covering with this offering. The dashboard that has been kind of promulgated throughout the market right now. Some specifications on the product, and then a quick wrap up, and we'll try and leave some time at the end, maybe 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So yeah, we've gone over kind of the start of the relationship between GRESB and Munich Re and how it was a natural fit. We're really trying to take advantage of the asset level reporting that is becoming standard this year in the 2020 GRESB assessments. And so with that, we geolocate every single asset that is uploaded into our portal. And, you know, so with Munich Re and their, you know, granular geospatial risk, we're able to combine these two data sets and give fund managers some easily accessible asset level and aggregated portfolio physical climate risk exposure data. So what do we mean? So what's actually on this platform? Well, I should make a distinction between both transition risk and physical risk. So this is a figure taken from the TCFD, which I think we all know is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And you know, so they broke it up into two broad categories: transition risks, which covers kind of policy risk, market developments, technology developments and evolution, and then also kind of corporate reputation. But right now, our partnership with Munich Re is really focused on the physical risk side. So acute kind of weather events and hazards, and then also kind of longer term climate patterns and how those can affect assets going forward into the future. So we want to make clear that this, when we say, you know, climate risk platform, and we narrow that down into the physical risk side, the data that you'll actually be getting is what we like to call exposure data, and I really like this kind of breakdown of what's included, and this is from the I4CE. the Institute for Climate Economics. And so we see here what's all included under physical climate risk. Well, there are the hazards, and so this would just be the potential occurrence of a specific hazard. Exposure would be like if that hazard touches down and actually affects a specific area at a specific threshold of severity. Then we have the vulnerability, which is, well, how vulnerable is a specific asset type and a specific asset to the exposure that it faces. And then that vulnerability can be broken down into both sensitivity and adaptive capacity. With this first run, we're going to be focusing on these first two, which we'll call collectively exposure. And so, I think it's important to talk a little more about the output of what actually is provided in terms of quantitative output. So I'm going to hand it over to Jürgen.
Yes, thank you, Eric. Good morning to all of you. You can hear me? Yes, yep. Okay. My name is Jürgen Cimicek, and I hold a PhD in hydrology, and I have over 20 years experience in natural hazard and climate risk assessment. And my basic experience is to develop new innovative climate risk assessment scores for real estate, banks, and so on. And what is unique? Unique is the combination. What we provide is a backward natural hazard assessment. So it means what happens in the past, referring to floods or typhoons, and we combine this with forward-looking climate risk assessments. And so far, this is very unique in the market. And what is the output? The output of our modeling efforts is presented by a full set of 12 backward-looking natural hazard scores and 7 forward-looking climate hazards, including return periods and normalized indices. And you see it on the slide. We distinguish between the acute and the chronic hazards, and the acute ones mainly represented by flood, river flood, and tropical storm, typhoon, flash flood, hail, and extra tropical storm. And for this, most of the acute hazards, we provide return periods, and that means a return period takes into account the probability of a certain event above a given threshold of severity, wind speed, for example, during a given time period. And all the model results allows you as a user a consistent analysis and a comparability on a worldwide scale. So this is important. So we have a consistent set of scores around the world based on the same scaling. Okay, back to Eric, or should I continue with modeling input? I think this is later.
I think that's a great explanation of kind of the background of these scores. I think we can give the people what they want and go into the dashboard. So let me just switch screens here. So when you're in the GRESB portal and you've uploaded your asset level data, and you click on this climate risk button here, you'll be navigated to this page. This is kind of the landing page for the platform. You'll go through the purchasing process, which we can talk more about in a bit. But essentially, you'll click on your orders, and you'll go ahead and analyze your data. So we can see this is specifically for Asia-Pac with a demo portfolio, and so this is Australia in particular. So there, just briefly, we see kind of three major panels. This is the kind of exposure overview. We have the map and we have the table. So first, looking at the exposure overview, first we can do kind of an overall filtering exercise by property type. You can choose any number, and you can see the overall average exposure changing as we click these. So let's go back to just all property types. And then also you can filter by state and province as well. So this, again, when you're looking at exposure overview, so the average exposure for a portfolio, it's not enough to say that, you know, the average of the portfolio is a certain amount, so you're safe per se. Essentially, there's a distribution of exposures within each one of these risks. So we've designed this tool to be able to quickly identify which one of these assets we should be paying closer attention to. So if we take a look at, you know, heat, we can see that, you know, the forward-looking heat risk, most of them are kind of under a specific threshold of severity. But this asset out here is actually extremely exposed. And so it's important to know that this one is the one we should be looking at. And we can go ahead and zoom in on this. And of course, this is filled with dummy data. But essentially, you can get that information and then scroll down at the table and find out more about that asset. And you can do this with any of the risks that we have here. And so even more strongly, the distribution on river flood, where there's quite a lot that are nowhere near rivers and wouldn't be exposed at all, but there are a couple that are near rivers and then extremely exposed to river flood risk currently. Now, we can also change our kind of combination of scenario and time frame. So as has been stated before, Munich Re offers 3 different forward-looking climate scenarios represented by representative concentration pathway 2.6, 4.5, and 8.5. And then also over the present 2050 and 2100. Of course, not all of these indices, as Jürgen had mentioned, are forward-looking. For instance, earthquake, you know, the frequency and severity of earthquake are not going to change with the differing concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So that will only be kind of presented in the present time frame. Whereas if we look forward to 2050, we're going to get kind of our forward-looking climate indices here. And so yeah, so you can choose this combination here. We think that's a powerful kind of overview. Again, with the ability to dig into the underlying kind of more specific locational data. So you can click on one of these. You can say, okay, I should be looking at demo asset 48. You can scroll down here and see what that means for that. The table in itself is pretty powerful as well. You can filter this by risk factor. So any of the 14 that are provided. Again, you can filter by scenario and filter by time frame. So if we just click a couple of these, we'll see that we can populate this pretty quickly.
Cool. Perhaps, Eric, one question that already came in is about what's the resolution of the data? And perhaps that's a question that Jürgen can answer as well. So the spatial resolution of each of these risks. So
it differs per risk, and Jürgen, I'll let you take this one.
Yes, thank you, Eric, to overhand me this question. It depends on exactly on the hazard, and for example, for flood, the spatial resolution is 30 meter. For storm surge, also 30 meter. And for the chronic or for the climate risk scores is the spatial resolution around 25 kilometers, depending where you are on on the globe, because we have several climate models with different spatial solution, but I can explain it later a bit more. But in general, yeah, we have, let's say, a spatial resolution under below 10 kilometers, and for flood and for flash flood and for storm surge, much lower is 30 meters.
Great, yeah, and that kind of difference between the resolution provided for certain risk indices is pretty key. For instance, you know, for looking, a flood could affect one side of a street, but then right across the street could be completely dry, and that just goes to the kind of the resolution of the underlying data as well, in terms of the elevation models that are built into the index, and like the tidal wave height and things like this, and all of that methodology is given. Actually, we can just scroll up here. And for those who actually go ahead and purchase some data for assets, you'll be able to access this dashboard and click on index documentation. And for each of the risks, you'll see an in-depth explanation about the data sources that go into each index, how those are kind of constructed into up into an index. And then also sometimes resolution of those underlying data sets. Also, just before we go on, you know, it's pretty clear down here what's kind of the most exposed, and you know, that green is relatively less exposed. But this color scheme only tells you so much. Of course, you can go ahead and show exact values here. And suddenly you're provided with the actual underlying quantifications that Munich Re provides. And these are quantifications of the return periods that Jürgen was talking about earlier. You know, one thing that I do like about Munich Re's data set is that, the kind of the quantitative risk exposure metrics are not relative to the other points collected. It's more absolute insofar as the return periods really take into account it's the probability that a hazard above a certain threshold of severity will happen in a given time frame. And once you construct a quantification like that with those, you know, very specific probability threshold and time frame, you're able to kind of do more with the data and set your own kind of understanding of what that will mean for your assets, and not worry about, okay, well, is this hazardous for Australia only, or is it hazardous like in terms of the entire globe? So I think that's a key element of Munich Re's data set. So you show the exact values, and we provide a mapping of the color scheme onto the underlying per risk factor, what that means in terms of its overlapping with the underlying quantification scheme. So we can also show the asset details, just so you can go through and figure out, you know, if you're interested in a certain city or a certain address or property type, you can go ahead and filter by that as well. So that's I think that will give you a better overview of here. Over the coming weeks, we're expecting to release a series of kind of insights posts, if you're familiar with the GRESB insights sort of blog format, on, you know, tips and tricks and basically insights on how to effectively use this tool, and what it means to have average exposure, you know, and what it means to go ahead and kind of weigh these different considerations when you're exploring the data. And now let's just, you know, I want to pass it back to Jürgen before we move off of this page on kind of, you know, there's a lot of interest in not obviously the backward-looking indices, but I'd probably say more at this point for strategic planning, and then also for tenancy risk and things like this. Most people are very interested in the forward-looking exercises. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of the sophistication of how we build forward-looking climate models into those indices?
Yes, thank you, Eric. I think most important thing to know is that our climate hazard modeling is strictly based on a climate framework established by the IPCC, which means the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, founded by the United Nations 1988. So this, we are follow strictly that recommendations of the global scientific community. And as Eric already mentioned, yeah, we did the modeling for 2 or 3 projections. RCP projection, that means representative concentration pathways scenarios for the greenhouse gas emissions. And we put that from the latest IPCC assessment report published in 2014. A few words to the modeling approach, so our climate modeling data and modeling approach for the current climate parameters are based on the ERA 5 global models with 25 kilometers resolution. And these are atmospheric reanalysis data. And the projection also based on a Cortex regional models with 25 kilometers resolution, and in combination with CMAP5 global models. I think most of you know these are the climate data provided by this IPCC board, and where Cortex data not available, we use the CMAP5. And Eric also mentioned already we have projections for the current situation and the 2050 and the 2100 timeframe. And for the chronic climate scores, as like the heat stress index, this is an index, and this index is composed of 5 variables, which mean days heat wave, for example, annual maximum temperature, annual mean temperature, days above 40 degrees, and tropical nights. So this is why we modeled an index, because to display all these climate parameters, it is easy, difficult to use. So we decided to create that, compose that into an index. So we have an index for heat stress, the fire weather index, precipitation, and drought. Yeah.
Thank you.
So far, thank you, Eric. Back to Eric.
Oh, were you done? I don't want to cut you off if you had more to say.
Well, perhaps one of the questions that came in just now during your explanation, Jürgen, which was very helpful, is about the data sources. So obviously, the scenarios is all clear, but for example, if you go to more local weather data, do you have any sources related to local data, or do you use global weather data, or how do you sort of specify for more local context and climates?
Yeah, for the current situation, yeah, for example, for the typhoon zoning system or tropical storm zoning system, the flood zoning system, of course, our expert approach the regional scientific institutes, collect all the available data, and based on that, they build so-called scenarios and data sets as an input to build a model, because for most of the current hazards, we have own pricing models in-house. And for the projections or for the climate layers, we use the data provided by the IPCC board. So in Germany, this is the DLR is supporting this, and they provide data a center where you can access and download the data. It's very complex and huge. It's terabytes of data, and we use that data and put it together and used it as an input for the modeling these chronic climate scores.
Right. And how local does the interpretation of the data get if you talk about exposure or vulnerability of assets? So can the tool also assess an individual building's exposure against flooding or heat stress? And one of the other questions is, for example, do you consider local drainage capacity? And if so, where do you get the data from? So I guess people are very interested to see how granular this data can get and also how specific to a specific asset.
Yes, thank you for this question. Yes, of course, we use in-house or in at Munich Re data in the same way with a spatial resolution of 30 meter. Of course, you can do a risk assessment on object level or a location level. So this is important for these flash flood and storm surge and sea level rise to have this granularity, because it makes no sense to do a flood risk assessment in a bigger area or a zip code area, so you don't know where your building exactly is. So this is important. And secondly, for the let's say for tropical storm, it's also possible to do a assessment on object level. So I think this is what we are doing since many years for the insurance and the reinsurance risk assessment. So this is the spatial accuracy is good for this kind of analysis.
Jürgen, may
Yes.
I add? I think they were also asking if we use drainage, for example, or any, let's say, infrastructure protective measures. I think we don't. We use topography to define, let's say, the flow of the water. But maybe you can, let's say, confirm what I'm saying. We don't go into this micro level to see if there's any drainage system.
Yeah,
correct?
We are working for to provide flood protection
Yes.
services as well. But you are right. In general, our scoring system looks around a building, and we have only poor information or no information about the building. So the protection level or the security level of a building. So our analysis is good to look around what is around the building. Is it close to a river? Is it close to the shoreline? Is it close to a earthquake default or whatever?
But so
yes,
I would say, I mean, you mentioned kind of defended river flood risk, and so, for instance, in the Netherlands, actually the it's not just the topography, but also kind of the kind of national level infrastructure of levees and canals and dams and such that are also built into this, so that you actually are getting the exposure of a specific building. Now we don't know if that building is raised up on pylons or what, but kind of the more major preventative measures on a national level are often built into this on the data side. One thing that I did want to mention, because this has been kind of brought up to us a couple times, is that this is not this kind of tool, and it will not be a part or linked or integrated with the general GRESB assessment, whether that be real estate or infrastructure assessments. It's not like we're going to go ahead and run everyone's assets through this in the back end, score everyone, and have that be a part of your GRESB score. This is not the intention. This is simply provided as a tool for our fund managers to use to get a better understanding. And so you don't have to worry about that, because that would essentially, we do, this is a platform. Munich Re is a first and a great choice, and one we're very happy to work with. There is a potential for other data providers to also provide their data on the platform. And so I think, when this comes about, it will give kind of the fund managers the flexibility to have that choice on what data is best for their assets. Supposing if they're really keen on certain types of risks, and they like the way that Munich Re models on such a granular level, then they can choose Munich Re data, and then they can go on an asset by asset basis, and go ahead and have that choice.
Perhaps in relation to that remark, Eric, we received a question if this data set can be used or will cover assets beyond the building sector. So think about infrastructure, which of course is what we cover with GRESB as well.
That's a great question. So right now, the tool is currently in the asset portal of real estate funds. That having been said, the platform runs off of basically a asset name and an asset location. So there are ways that we can work with the infrastructure funds and assets to go ahead and be able to use the platform, and they can follow up with me separately to figure out how to do that.
But may I add to that? So the hazards we see are independent of the scores we see are independent of the underlying assets. Yeah. So actually, you can use them for any kind of asset.
Exactly. Great. Let's just move back to the slideshow. Here we go. And if, so I think we can maybe move on and then quickly run through some product specifications and then get to the question and answer session. So a quick note, when the peer groupings are basically constructed for the results period in November this year, we'll have kind of those underlying those peer groups, and so we'll be able to benchmark your specific portfolios against a like peer group benchmark of risk exposure. So this is quite important, because if you have a portfolio of, say, office buildings on the in any part of the world, so let's say California, and you want to go ahead and benchmark yourselves against other office buildings in California, and it turns out that your exposure is much higher than kind of the average exposure represented by the benchmark, then you might want to be looking at, well, your offices are more at risk of maybe reduced tenancy due to certain things, or and want to check out those other assets in the area. Of course, we don't give what those assets are. That's kind of research that you'll have to do on your own. But it at least gives you an idea of how you stand in relation to the market. So we think this benchmarking function will be useful. And essentially, those can be provided on the same bar graph as the overall exposure overview. In terms of asset selection, I've touched on this briefly, but it's very flexible. You can buy data for one asset, or you can buy data for an entire fund, or anything in between. So you can go ahead and actually, if you have a portfolio that's 1,000 assets, then you can go and filter by region and property type, and select any subsection that you want, and mix and match as you choose. So we really wanted to give that flexibility. Also, in terms of due diligence, you don't actually have to own the asset at that location in order to buy risk data for that specific location. So if you have a series of locations in mind that you want to test out, for due diligence functions, go ahead and add those, create an asset name there and input the location. We'll geolocate it for you. And then you can go ahead and buy that for those locations as well. So really trying to give as much flexibility to the user as possible. Also in terms of, well, can I, one thing that we get a lot of questions on is, well, we'd really like to integrate the value of the asset into our analyses. And while GRESB does not mandate that you input the gross asset value of every single asset into our portal for the reporting season, we acknowledge that this is an important kind of step in the analysis. So what we've done is just make all of the data exportable into an Excel format for you all. So essentially for all that data that you buy, you can play with it in the dashboard, or you can just download it and get all of the indices for all of the time periods and forward-looking climate scenarios. And then you can create basically another column, input those gross asset values, and then kind of do your more in-depth analysis. And then finally, the moment you've all been waiting for, pricing. And we'll show this on the next slide, but essentially, just so you can contextualize it before we show the numbers and get distracted, it's a scaled model. So the first asset that you buy will be more expensive, and then as you buy more, each asset gets less and less expensive, and so as you buy more, the average price of your assets will go ahead and decrease. And so with that, we'll go to the asset selection page, and you'll see not only the pricing scheme, but also basically how you'll go ahead and select assets. So as we see down here, from assets 1 to 10, each asset data set will run you around €600. And you can see the decreasing price scheme here for larger and larger tier groupings of assets. And then also, so this calculates in real time as you go ahead and select assets. You can filter by property type and country, as I said before. Also, we show you the kind of accuracy of the geolocation process for that particular asset. Sometimes if your address is not very good, or you just put in a street name and no actually street number or something like this, you'll get a little notification here. And so that will say, okay, well, I need to go kind of review my address for demo asset number 3. Also, if you've gone ahead and reviewed the kind of details for that particular asset and you come back to this page, it's still the same. Go ahead and click here to update. It'll rerun, go pull the correct data, and then show you those assets which are available for selection. So, if you're changing kind of asset management of the information, go ahead and click here to update to make sure that you have all of these available to you. So again, no need to scribble this down. The slides and the webinar recording will be made available to you whenever we record those. And so, yeah, we can field questions on that later. One thing to mention is, as you get up in terms of portfolio size, we acknowledge that, for some of our much larger portfolios, the price tag can add up. But this is something that, you can come talk to us about, and we can make sure that we're providing you with a good benefit for cost to you. And with that, I think we can just right on time, 45 minutes. Let's go ahead and open it up to questions. And Ruben, handing back to you to go ahead and see what we have.
Thank you very much. That's very insightful. Perhaps to clarify indeed and to reiterate that this currently is a tool that's available to, let's say, real estate managers. So if you're an infrastructure manager or asset operator, please be patient, but we'll certainly look into creating a solution for that sector as well. Also for those investors on this webinar, if you would like to get involved in the conversation about how we can create a flow from, let's say, the asset level to the fund manager to your own portfolio, then feel free to contact us. Certainly because we are putting together an industry working group on this. So if you're interested to collaborate in a group, please let us know and we'll get back to you. And of course, the same accounts to real estate managers. If you would like to involve in the future development of the product, or if you see specific, let's say, improvement opportunities, feel free to contact us and we'll get back to you and see if we can involve you in the industry working group that we're currently setting up. Now, I'm not sure if any of the other speakers would like anything to add in addition to what we already discussed. Otherwise, I would say let's get quickly into the many questions that have been coming in. Nope, okay. It is a long list. So again, if we're not going to be able to cover all of the questions, then we'll certainly follow up after this webinar. So one question is from Vincent van Beideveld, who's asking what part of the tool would be open or available to investor members at the time? So not so much the reporting fund managers, but the investors.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this dashboard capability is will not be available to investors. It's for the participants and the fund managers to go ahead and insert their asset level information. And so, yeah, as we move forward in the coming months, we should be involved with the investors in understanding what type of information that they want to percolate up to them. And we can talk about that during our industry working groups. Yeah, we don't have a formal mechanism for them to go ahead and ask for and receive and then have the fund managers share this to them. Come November during our results period, we will be integrating functions for fund managers to go ahead and produce reports based on this. And so if you want to have kind of insight and influence on kind of how those reports are constructed, how they look, what kind of aggregations are necessary to keep kind of specific asset level information proprietary, then go ahead and join our industry working group so we can make sure that those reports are constructed in a really great way and informative way. And then fund managers can use those reports to go and pass up to their investors. So right now, I mean, if an investor, if an investor has all of the asset locations, they could create a real estate entity by themselves, input all the asset locations and buy the data for themselves. But imagine that that size of a portfolio might be pretty expensive. So we probably suggest that you reach out to your fund managers, say, hey, this tool is available. We'd really like to know that for you to buy this and be able to get a better understanding of your physical climate risk exposure, and then have them send up a PDF. But yeah, so I think that answers it for now. But yeah, reach out so we can have those conversations over the summer.
Excellent.
Eric, if I may add,
yes.
If one of the investors would be interested in, let's say, a more timely kind of analysis, we at Munich Re would be, happy to discuss, always including GRESB, of course. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Then probably a question for Jürgen from our friend Ruchi from CSR Design, who's asking, it's great that earthquake risk is included, but of course it's not supposed to be part of climate risk. So does earthquake exposure differ depending on the different RCP scenarios, or is it just a constant exposure figure, so to say?
Thank you, Ruben, for the question. And it's it's totally different topic. So earthquake is independent from RCP, greenhouse emission scenarios, and because it's a physical hazard and not a meteorological hazard, so it's totally independent, and so you have to you can use the return periods for the intensities to assess the shaking activity, but this is independent from the climate thing.
Great, thank you.
Answered that your question?
I hope so.
And
also,
I just
quite
want to add that all of the available scenarios and timeframes for each risk factor are delineated and made transparent even before you buy the data. If you go to the kind of the climate risk platform landing page that I showed earlier, you can dig into the data specifications and look at for what timeframes and climate scenarios each risk is available for, so you know what you're buying before you get it. We think that's ultimately very, very important, so that you're not expecting, you know, earthquake exposure in 2100 and then buy the data to find out that that's not the case.
Yeah. Well, it probably also answers one of the other questions in terms of for those different time frames, 2050, 2100, if let's say the risk exposure scores are averaged out over those years, or what the calculation methodology around it is. If that's also there available and explained, then I'm happy to skip that question.
Yeah. I mean, for each of the timeframes and climate scenarios, nothing is averaged out. I mean, it's you can still get per asset. I mean, it's going to look the same. The map is going to look the same. The scores will change. Those little dots and their underlying quantitative metrics will change. And so you'll be able to see at the asset level what the exposure score is, even in those far-reaching timeframes, right?
Yeah, and that's also perhaps related to Tanya Smith's question, who's asking, is there one overall score for physical risk that can be assigned to a particular asset? So one that combines all the data across the different risks and hazards?
So we've made a design choice not to go ahead and create sort of an overall average risk score. You know, we think that this smooths out because for basically every single risk, you could have no exposure, but then you're super high exposure on a particular risk. And if you average that out into a general risk score, suddenly you've completely smoothed that one risk over, and you don't have that kind of insight. So, you know, we know that maybe this might be interesting at a portfolio level just to get a super broad overview. But the dashboard and the way that the data is constructed, we really hope that kind of the appreciation for the different types of risks, the different scoring systems that they're constructed off of, really shows through, and we don't kind of start mixing apples and oranges. And a lot of this is explained in the methodology and in the scoring system. And Jürgen, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to. I think it's a good thing to have an overview scoring, but in case, for example, for a specific location, flood is the hazard or the risk driver, and you combine that with 7 other scores, and the average is maybe then medium. But for this specific location is highly exposed to a flood. So that is what Eric mentioned. This is maybe some kind of inaccuracy what you bring in your overall assessment.
Right.
So we recommend for, especially for the flood and for the storm surge and for the sea level, to use this scoring separately, because if you do an overall create an average above 12 scores, then it makes more weak the result.
Sure. Also, 2 questions specifically from different persons, from Tracy Riddle and from Tim Miller. about the resolution of flooding in China. So if it's possible to have a 30-meter resolution of flooding, for example, in Shanghai. And what's the level of confidence behind that data or that level of resolution?
Yeah, for the flood topic, we, of course, in China, we provide also for the 30-meter resolution, and we work in close collaboration, or we contracted JBA. It's one of the leading flood modeling company located in the UK, and we use their flooding system in the end. So this is the only hazard that we have buy-in, and the other ones are based on our own modeling experience. So because flood is a huge topic, an important topic, and it is, yeah, you need to collect a lot of data and need 2D models and so on. And that was the reason why we decided to contract or to collaborate with the JBA risk management company. You can see on the website their offers.
Okay, and that perhaps also relates to the question we received from Vinesh, who says, how much of this data is proprietary and how much comes from external sources?
So this is exactly the only one that we buy in from external scientific data providers.
Excellent. Okay.
Yep.
Well, being very mindful of the time, we have some other questions that are probably most related to some of the earlier answered questions. They get quite technical and quite specific. So again, for those that have dialed in, we'll make sure to answer those questions following this webinar. And of course, again, if you have any additional questions, please go to GRESB.com, and we'll make sure to to just fill in the gaps in terms of your questions and your knowledge on this. So if you have any questions that we didn't answer today, we'll make sure to get those, but also if you can think of any other questions after this webinar, then please contact us at GRESB.com. And we'll also put the recording of this webinar on our website shortly. And Eric, you know this better than I do, but I think we have a second webinar scheduled for Europe and the Americas.
That's correct. That's tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Okay, well, go to our website and you can find the exact times. So hereby I would like to thank Jürgen, Sergey, and Eric again for the great insights. And of course, thanks to everyone attending today's webinar on our new climate risk platform. I'd like to close with a very topical quote by Robert Merton. You might know him as a quite famous American economist, but also a Nobel Prize winner, who once said, "It is wrong to think risks can be eliminated because they can be measured." But I'd like to add that if we don't know or understand the risks, we cannot prepare or mitigate them. And I think this too is a great sort of support in terms of understanding our risk exposure when it concerns climate risks and real assets. That's all from our side. On behalf of Munich Re and GRESB, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.